Welcome to the fifth podcast of Blossom House. And today, since we are all women here, we're going to be discussing some issues related to women's rights and gender roles. So let's start pretty simple. There's a lot of disparity that we can see around the world between the rights that men have and the rights that women have. And so one example of that is the women's pay gap. So what are your guys' thoughts on
For the women's pay gap, I've been reading a lot on it recently. Like it was International's Women's Day, like maybe a month ago now. So I was reading some books on that. There was a book called Invisible Woman. So this book was really about how as women grow older, the pay gap like starts to increase. So women who are like past a certain age and who are into motherhood, they're often ignored and by like everyone in their society, like they're just overlooked. Even when they say hi to other people, they don't get hugs. People don't say hi back, and then the pay gap is much higher for them. So it's not just like it's not equal for all women, but it also is linked to age as well. There's also been a lot of research into how when women are younger, it's pretty close. If the gap is there, it's pretty small, but as the age grows, then the gap also increases, which is interesting to see.
that? Is there like a reason for that specifically why age is affecting anything?
I think because with age, it's seen as you're less attractive, and also as you become a mother, it's kind of I don't know. It's called the burden of motherhood. Like you're just seen as less unfit after you give birth for some reason.
No, I think that's true because I read that a lot of companies don't want to hire women if they know that they're about to give birth soon because that means like they're going to take their pregnancy leave and whatnot, right? And I guess yeah, that just translates to after they're giving birth too. It's also less desirable to hire them because like I don't even know, maybe they just have to care for a child or something. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
not just the
just
mother
kind of
though.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's also seen like part of the whole gender roles thing is that it seems like a lot of people think that the burden of taking care of children is on the woman and not like the man if there's a man in the relationship. So like it's sort of that thinking that might um, help explain that because when you're hiring, you're like, oh, they have children, they can't like work as much, which is kind of weird considering there's more than one person in a family most of the time.
Mm.
Yeah. In terms of gender roles, there's so many times when I see like dads taking care of their kids being referred to as babysitting when you're literally not babysitting, it's your own child that you're taking care of. So I feel like that just really shows the disparity between like the roles you give women in the family and the roles you give men in the family in like a heteronormative relationship.
We could also bring up like racism within the gender pay gap as well, because there's also studies that show that people of color or people who are um, not white are like women who are not white are usually paid much less. And then that's not even talking about like the developing country. Did I say it right? Developing countries. So
Developing.
yeah, I said it right this time. Developing countries where women are paid significantly less. Some stats for you. Actually, I didn't even give any numbers. I couldn't remember any.
Facts for you.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of racism even within like the women's area. Like I've seen things where they'll sort of measure out the pay gap that they receive, like you said, and it's like white male at the top, um, and then what was it? It was some other ethnicity of male, and then white female, and then some other ethnicities of male, and then all the other ethnicities of female. So it's like even within your gender, your race is also playing a role in that, and it just seems really unfair for something that like you can't even control, you know?
It also seems like there's some bias in the data because let me see, did I remember this correctly? You said the last category was like all other races. So they're
No,
not.
like I'm like paraphrasing it because I don't remember the exact ethnicities, but like when they list them off, like all the other ones are at the bottom of the list.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Never mind then.
They're not just like grouping them up like everyone else, you know?
No,
White
so I was like,
people, other people.
Yeah.
I mean, like, are you sure you got everyone else? Yeah.
Um, if we're discussing racism within like women's rights, but like specifically about the women's rights movement and like feminism. I also think there's a lot of stereotypes, if that's the right word, or stigma associated with that, where like some people hear the word feminist and then they are like, they think
You
of
hate
the
men.
very, yeah, like man hater, the ones who, like, not necessarily that they're like, just because you don't emphasize that you are looking for equality doesn't mean that you're like you're trying to put women above men. I don't know if that makes sense because like it's like the during the Black Lives Movement where they were talking, they're like you're emphasizing um like um the human rights of black people, right? And just because you're not saying um that they should be equal to everyone else doesn't mean that they shouldn't be. I'm not explaining this right. I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah, it was like the Black Lives Matter movement versus the All Lives Matter
Yeah,
movement, in which the All Lives Matter movement was like directly in response to the BLM movement, right? And they were like, what about everybody else? Even though we're not trying to focus on everyone else, like we're trying to focus on the fact that police brutality is like specifically targeting Black people over people of other races. And like, since they weren't able to recognize that, they kind of just got defensive and started their own movement, being like, we are all equal. So yeah, I think that when your first reaction in light of like a movement that wants to stand up for the rights of one certain group that's like historically been like neglected and been oppressed, then I think that like you have to do some serious soul searching, because if you're defensive that they're finally fighting for their own rights, then where does that put you, right? Why are you mad that they're fighting for their own rights? Why do you think that like them fighting for themselves is a direct attack on what you've been currently doing? So I just feel like you just have to think about what you've been doing and like the social structures that you've been supporting throughout your life, and like just, yeah, why are you being so defensive and starting another whole movement in response to that?
I do want to say that there's been like a whole narrative of feminazis that has been going around for a while. That there's been a lot of examples of like extreme feminists who don't even talk about equality. It's really about putting women above men, and I think that's it's been linked to feminism, and that's why feminism has been getting such a bad rep lately, which makes sense. So there's some valid concern about like putting women above men, but I don't think that the entire movement should be like scrapped just because of it. I think we need to like
mm-hmm.
differentiate like this is feminazi, this is feminism. Like
Mm-hmm.
feminism, equality for women and men. So
And I also think it's important, like when we're talking about women's rights and stuff, that like in terms of um, sort of battling the stereotypes that women have historically um, been brought up with, it's like um, I feel like you have to make a difference between like um, just because you're fighting that stereotype doesn't mean that women aren't also allowed to be that thing. You know, like women can be strong and they can fight, but they can also enjoy like cooking and things like that. So just because um, you're fighting a stereotype doesn't mean that people aren't allowed to be that. And I feel like
Right.
sometimes more radical parts of the movement just seem to forget that.
Oh my god, this brings up this reminds me of Malala. She got recently got married, right? And there was a lot of people who were mad at her because like when she was like 15 or something, she was like, I'm never getting married. And like people they say a lot of things when they're 15, right? Just because you get married doesn't mean you're not a feminist anymore, right? So you can do a lot of things and still be a feminist. I think it plays back into these like gender norms and stereotypes that you have to fit a certain thing to be a certain like person. Like if you're a feminist, you just have to, I guess you have to act more like tomboy. I guess that's the stereotype. I don't really know. And if you're anything, if you're too feminist, like too feminine, then you don't fit the feminist image. Like I don't think it's like either or.
Yeah, I feel like at some point we've been trying to prove that like women can be other things aside from like what's been considered stereotypically feminine, that word,
Yeah.
stereotypically feminine, that like sometimes it's easy to forget that you don't have to reject everything that's stereotypically feminine, right? Like I can still like pink, I can still want to like marry a man. I can still
Lol. Okay.
The immediate like next like
Are you
that.
sure? You're like disgusting.
I can still like sewing and I can still be a feminist because at some point it's like I don't have to shame myself for liking things that girls traditionally like, and I don't have to like force myself to like the more tomboyish aspects either. Because I think a certain part of the movement is like supporting all women no matter what they decide to do. And if they want to like be a housewife and be a stay-at-home mom, then that's ultimately what they decide. And I think we should support them for it nonetheless.
On the topic of women's rights and like women's wants, I guess we could, this might be a nice transition into abortion. So pro-life versus pro-choice, really about the battle of whether women can choose what they want to do with their bodies, or whether the patriarchy triumphs again. What are our opinions? Lots of thoughts. I'm trying to process.
So to me, there's not really any valid debate. Like to me, any argument for pro-life just doesn't seem well thought out. Because to me, like as a woman, if I ever imagine myself in that scenario, I want control over what happens to my body, right? And so it doesn't make sense that there are laws preventing me from doing something, because it's like the law is putting like,
The onus on women, kind of.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's also putting something like, I don't know how to say this without sounding sort of weird, but it's putting the life of something that's not even born or alive yet over my own, and it doesn't seem right. Like I should be the one to have the choice because I'm the one who's biologically and physically dealing with the consequences of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Personally, I'm very pro-choice. I also don't think there is a valid argument for like being pro-life either, because when you really come down to it, being pro-life isn't really about like caring about people's lives. It's about control, right? Like at some point, you just want to control women and what they do with their bodies, because the line between like a cell and the point where it transitions to an actual human baby is like not very easily drawn, right? So when a woman wants to have an abortion, um, it doesn't really, okay, there's no good way to word it, but, and I know that the clump of cells argument has been like used very often, and at some point it's not a clump of cells, right? But like at some point it's not more important than the life of the woman that's bearing the child and like what you're going to force her to go through if you force her to have the baby. And like people always say you can just put it up for adoption. But if you think that like what the adoption agency is like any good for children at all, then I think you should also do some more research, because there's so many children in the system that have like been put through so much abuse that overwhelming them with more children isn't going to lead to like good livelihoods at all. And it's kind of cruel to say that they would have been better off born. But if you can't like, if you don't have the ability to raise a child, and if you know that you're going to be bringing the child into a world that's like not going to be kind to them, that isn't just, that just isn't going to facilitate their growth at all, then maybe you should just not have it because yeah, you're just going to put somebody else through pain. And like I do consider putting someone through the adoption services. I do consider that like not the best option because of how much abuse goes through children who go through it. And I do think that if like your sole motive is just to control women by forcing them to have children, then you don't really care about the life of the baby. You just care about like controlling what women do with their bodies.
I definitely agree with that. I think at the end of the day, like it's your choice. Like I don't see why other people should have to mind their business about other people's bodies and what they choose to do. And also another point is that motherhood isn't just about like giving birth to a baby. It's also
Mm-hmm.
about raising a child, real human life. So for the pro-life movement, my argument is that it's you're bringing someone into the world, but what kind of world are you bringing them in the parents if the mother doesn't want the child, like no matter what their circumstances, maybe it's rape, maybe it's like financial circumstances, maybe it was just completely unplanned, right? But if the baby is not wanted, then it's just going to be a hellish life for them as well. um
I feel like
mm,
there's yeah,
Sorry,
what?
oh, I was just going to say, even if we have these abortion laws, that's not going to stop people from having abortions. They're just going to have it in more unsafe ways.
I also think there's a lot of like inequality when you're dealing with like issues like abortion and like women's health because like even with abortion laws, I don't know if how accurate I'm remembering things, but I'm pretty sure it was in Texas where they have the law that like you literally you can't leave the state to get an abortion, right? And like I think they have snitch laws too.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and that just seems like it's like um they're making the argument that it takes a man and a woman in order to make a baby, right? And that the man should have as much say in the like in the process of that and getting abortion as the woman. But that's just not true considering the woman is the one who's carrying the child, right? Um,
Not sorry, can I just jump in? Like not only that, they're punishing the women exclusively for what like they decide, even if it's a mutual decision, if they like decide to abort the child, which like you really see the imbalance because if men are going to have an equal say in whether a woman keeps the child, even though it's their own body, then why are we like exclusively punishing women for their actions?
exactly. And you also see that inequality with things like birth control because like I'm pretty sure it is there's there's
So
probably a way
many,
to like have birth control for men,
but
but
there's not enough.
yeah, the
Yeah, there's
responsibility is
not enough.
always on the woman.
Uh-huh.
When like there's a lot that you see like systematically that the laws are being made just to place control over women, and that needs to change.
Hmm. Should we transition to talking about rape culture? Okay. Um, I guess I can go. So to start off with rape culture, I want to say that it's more than just the products, which is basically rape and sexual assault, sexual harassment. It's also about a whole system which basically punishes victims. It does not punish the perpetrators. In fact, it usually ends up protecting them, especially people who are in places of power and who do these terrible acts. So, I guess I want to start off with some examples. So, I've been seeing a lot of examples like throughout the years, even in recent days, like in developing countries like India and Bangladesh, which just at it like it's happening every single day. There's some sexual assault case or another. Some woman has been murdered, and usually the police doesn't do anything about it. If anything, they encourage it, and they're like, well, I've actually watched a video where one of the police was like, well, they have to have like a good time somewhere, right? Which is terrible. there's a lot of corruption in developing countries, especially within the police force, which goes unchecked, and that allows a lot of this to continue happening. In the case of developed countries, although I would say the police is not corrupted to the same extent, there's still a lot of sexual assault cases that go unreported, and oftentimes people in power actively try to silence the survivors. For example, in there's this case of Larry Nazar. Basically, he was like this um, gymnastics coach in a lot of universities. I think UCLA was one of them, and he was like sexually harassing like females for like 15 years, and it only came out in 2015. I want to say, I think 2015, and that was only after the woman had initially been silenced by I think the institution, but also the FBI, and then only after like 9 months or something it came out. So there's a lot of silencing that has been going on, but these are all these examples are just like examples of rape culture product. But the whole system is just like these people, like people in power, the police, the government, well, not the government, but sometimes like the law itself, and schools, universities, all these people, the military as well, like they are actively trying to silence survivors and also not putting enough blame on the perpetrators and punishing them as they should.
Yeah, Shreya, to your point about Larry Nazar, I think there's also one instance that came up like pretty recently, which I read of this Dutch beach volleyball player. I think his name is, oh, we're name dropping now, Steven Vandeveld, and he is like a convicted rapist, right?
Mhm.
He groomed a 12-year-old girl, but he's
Oh.
still allowed to participate in international beach volleyball competitions, even though he's been convicted.
Mhm.
So, at some extent, I feel like there's like a serious problem with how the system um, with sports and the system, like the justice system in general, like how it deals with rapists and like the extent to which it actually punishes them. Because from what I see, he's not getting any punishment. He's still allowed to compete. He's still allowed to travel internationally, and basically he faces like basically no repercussions for what he did.
I think there's also like um, a whole like system, not just necessarily like governmental, but just the way that people have been brought up, where boys are continuously excused for their behavior rather than taught to respect the rights of the women around them. And so that's something that also needs to change, where like parents need to teach their child that some behaviors are not okay and that they're not entitled to um like to have a girl or a woman, and also with the issues of consent, because I don't think a lot of people are like knowing what consent is and how to properly exercise it, and some, even if they do know, they just don't care enough to actually like follow it.
Yeah, because from a young age, like young girls are actually taught that like any form of violence that another boy commits towards them, it's because he has a crush on you. So yeah, so like women are constantly being told that violence is the same as love, and I think when you hammer that idea constantly in their heads, like it's really no wonder that they don't get out of abusive relationships, and it's also no wonder that men just are entitled to like I guess yeah, I guess it's just like one of the reasons that our system doesn't do enough to convict them because to some extent we like think that they're entitled to it.
Like on that note, just like there's the whole idea of like pigtail pulling, right? That you mentioned. There's also a lot where it's like, um,
Boys will be boys. Oh, I think she froze.
Um,
I think
I
she meant
know.
the boys will be boys idea. Oh,
Yeah.
I guess I can take over. And then the whole boys will be boys idea and all this just like also the idea of toxic masculinity that boys will they shouldn't cry, like they have to be strong, right? It really just ends up putting a lot of burden on women and also burdening men as well because they're unable to cry. Sorry, Suthi, you're back. I took over because you froze. Yeah. No, I'll let you go. I guess what was I gonna say? Now I forgot. Keep going with your thought. I said
I
boys
don't
will be
know. I don't
boys.
know what you.
Were you saying boys will
We'll
be
keep
boys?
going.
Okay.
I
Okay, so the whole idea of boys will be boys, it puts a lot of burden on men as well. Um, to just put up this image of being strong and being unable to really show their emotions. And it burdens women as well because ultimately it feeds this fragile ego in men, which women are, they have to deal with. Um, I was listening to your whole conversation and now I have like a whole bunch of points built up. So I think, where do I start? The first one with, I think Shruti, you were talking about. Okay, so I was gonna bring up something. Let me go back. Something about oh yeah, so blaming women. To that point, I want to add on that a lot of times the women also have the burden of having to do a bunch of behaviors because it's assumed that the problem lies with them, that they can avoid being raped if they do a bunch of things like you don't wear like scandalous clothing, don't go to fraternity parties, stay home, don't drink, right? So all of this whole narrative, it's not fair because it puts a burden on women, but it also lets the perpetrator get away with whatever they're doing because you're not blaming them, you're blaming the woman and you're telling them to avoid getting raped because it's like the assumption there is it's that it's on you if you get raped if you don't follow these rules, right? um so, and another problem with that is that, like, if you keep on putting all the burden on women, then ultimately that ends up constraining their response, like their opportunities, because it builds up, it adds up, right? Like, you can't drink, you can't go to parties, you can't do this, you can't do that. If you travel alone, then it increases your chances of being sexually assaulted. Like all of these, it ends up limiting their opportunities, which is not fair. Another point I wanted to add. Okay, I'll just keep going. One more thing is rape culture. It's not just women, but it's also men. And a lot of the sexual assault cases on men, they often go underreported because of that whole toxic masculinity thing. Like it's impossible for a man to get raped. It could never happen. And if you do, then it's seen like as some sort of weakness thing when it's really not the case. And there's a lot of cases where like female perpetrators also go ignored. One last point. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I had this other point where oftentimes the legal system treats sexual assault as this really stereotypical thing where it has to be a male perpetrator, a female victim. She can't have been drinking. She couldn't have been doing like anything very provocative. Like she has to report it immediately. There has to be ample evidence, which all four of these that really discounts a bunch of other cases, and many people are, they don't report because there's so much fear of the stigma that could happen, and it's really hard to talk about these experiences, right? So when they do come forward and you're met with that kind of resistance, it's really hard for them to heal and to get the justice that they require.
And on the note of like a lot of cases going unreported or even like not dealt with, there's also like there's a broad range of what qualifies as sexual assault, right? And so sometimes something will happen where someone will feel like, that was a little uncomfortable, but they're like, it's not a big deal because it didn't go all the way. But the thing is, it's still wrong, right? But you just, because it's not completely like characterized as typical like rape, it's looked over.
I see what you mean. Like, it doesn't even have to necessarily be rape. Like, it can be like sexual harassment, and a lot of the times, like, whoever was a victim of that, they will like rationalize it in their head, like, oh, it's not a big deal. You're making it a big deal, which it's like this sort of kind of belittling attitude towards yourself, which we should not encourage, right? It's a product of our society as well. We should really try to um, get people to like tell their stories and blame whoever was actually responsible for this.
And there's also like, I don't know, how like the whole cat calling thing where like I've seen a lot of posts on Instagram where it doesn't seem like men understand that it's not really like a compliment to like be catcalled at or to have like someone random come up and compliment your figure because it's like it's not really necessary. Like there's a difference between being like, "Hey, your shoes are cute," and being like, "Whoa, you're hot." Like it's there's like a line that you don't cross, right? But some people just don't understand that because they equate the compliments with like something good. It's like we're complimenting you. Why are you taking it like that? And it's like it's not registering in your brain that it's making me uncomfortable.
Yeah, like it's not actually complimenting, it's objectification. I feel like to a certain extent, like men just don't understand that. Like they don't really understand how uncomfortable it is to like only be seen for your body in a way. And yeah, it's just so uncomfortable when that happens.
Adding on to that, I was recently rereading Speak. I forgot her first name, Anderson, the author Anderson,
Oh,
and
Lori Hollis
yeah,
Anderson.
yes, there we go.
Yeah, that's a
And
good pick.
exactly, it's so good. And I'm sorry for whoever's listening, but basically the main character was I sexually assaulted in the book, and the author was being interviewed, or no, she had many fans come up to her and talk to her, and then like men would ask her like how come the main character was so upset about being sexually assaulted. So the author was saying,
What?
okay,
I'm sorry, you
let me
genuinely
explain.
asked that?
Yeah, and she like the author even said like she was really surprised by it, but then she began to understand that like they haven't been taught like what that experience feels. Like they're just genuinely not aware of how hurtful it is to like for that to happen to you, right? So it's a matter of also teaching our children, like teaching other people in our society that this stuff is not okay. We with the whole like narrative things like boys will be boys and all of that, like it's actually been harming more people than it has been helping. Like we have to teach them from a young age, even though it's a heavy topic, we have to protect our children and protect everyone else by teaching them that this is not the way, this is unfair, this is not right, it hurts people like for life.
I also think another thing is like people just like among their friends have to be like taught that even if it's among a group of friends that if someone makes a comment like that you need to shut it down, right? Because like even if you're just like with your friends and you're just like joking about it, it's like it's you need to teach the people around you and teach your children that like to shut those things down, right? Like, hey, that wasn't cool. I don't know what exactly you meant by that, but this is why it's not really a cool thing to say, and I think you should do better. And like those types of actions need to increase because otherwise there's a sense of like you're you're seeing the things happening and you're letting it go because you don't think it's a big deal in the moment, but by letting that comment pass it's like you're telling that person that that was okay to say and that builds up.
Mm.
Yeah, because like to you it might be a joke, but to us it's actually reality, and it's like deeply uncomfortable to hear somebody joke about it in the ways that they do, because like um it's really not something to joke about if you personally like haven't been in danger of it or haven't like been afraid of walking down the street at night in fear that you would get sexually assaulted. So yeah, to some extent, they just aren't being educated about that. And to both of your points about educating your sons about like rape culture and what it does, I feel like there is also a disparity between like the things we're telling our daughters and the things we're telling our sons. Because from a young age, like maybe what 8 or 9, I was told that I couldn't wear tank tops anymore and I had to wear longer shorts because if I walked down the street, then older men would stare at me. And at that point, I didn't understand it, but later I did, right? So why are like women, like young girls, having to shoulder the burden of learning about it while like so much of male violence goes unexcused? And I just think that's really unfair because like I was just like 8 or 9. I didn't really think about that at all.
Yeah, so not only teaching our children, but how we teach them, like equally, we should give the same message. And it's definitely not fair to tell like your daughters that, oh, you can't do this, you can't do this, right? Because ultimately that's constraining them, and you shouldn't have to tell them that like it's they can wear whatever they want. But if let's say like a man gets attracted by that, that's their fault. Like you should
Yeah.
really put the blame on them. Yeah, so
Oh
the
my
mess
god, guys, your
oh
shoulders are showing.
the messaging has to be different,
Get thee
exactly.
to a nunnery.
Mhm. And also, oh my god, okay,
The
love that.
Hamlet references for anyone who is possibly listening and has not watched Hamlet.
I don't recommend. I hate Hamlet. Anyways, also on the joke thing, if we like these quote unquote jokes and pranks, like if the more you do it, it just seems like it's more acceptable because you're like, haha, it's
Mhm.
supposed to be funny. It just no, it's not acceptable. We need to shut it down. Hmm. Oh yeah, okay. Do we want to end it here? We can um basically I guess this whole podcast was it started off with women's rights, women's issues, and it for the most part it's stuck that way, but we also want to emphasize that it's really about gender norms and gender stereotypes and how to challenge them, break out of them so that we can live lives with and pursue whatever opportunities we want. It's really about breaking those norms and stereotypes. Um, yeah, I don't have anything else to say. Do you guys have anything to say to end off?
Um, Mostly just keep yourselves accountable and keep the people around you accountable because making sure that the people around you know when they say something that seems like it's crossing a line makes it better for everyone in the end.
Yeah. Um, I don't condone violence, but you should totally punch a misogynist.
Wow. I hope we don't get like sued. We will get our cast diploma. It's fine. Thank you. Cast diploma, Flyme diploma. Okay. About cutting this out. Bye.
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 Bye.